Moving to Live is a podcast about movement and exercise. Along with our sister podcast, FitLab PGH, we have the ethos that movement is a lifestyle, not just an activity. Because movement is part of what makes your life complete. We interview people in the movement field who have a variety of experiences, education, and professional titles. At the end of the day, we all want to move more, and we want our clients, patients, and athletes to move more, move better, and move more efficiently. Some of the people we interview you will have heard of. They're well known in and outside of the movement and exercise professions. Others you may not have heard of, but they have a great deal of knowledge and information to share. Many people doing the best work spend their time working with people, not working on their social media presence. Each Moving to Live interview will be long enough to impart usable information, but short enough to be able to be consumed in a single listen, during your workout, commute, or even during dinner prep. Before we get to the interview, a quick request. If you like what you hear, please leave a review wherever you listen to podcasts and share the podcast with your friends or anyone who understands that movement is a lifestyle. We appreciate it, and our guests appreciate it too. Welcome back to another edition of the Moving to Live podcast. It's been a while. I could blame it on COVID or other things, but I think one of the things that's important when you do something that you really believe in is sometimes you have to step back, think about it, and think about what you're doing and what your goals are. I was talking about this a little bit with today's guest. The main goal of Moving to Live is twofold. It's first to tell people's stories, because when you hear about somebody in the movement field, you may think that their job is absolutely magical, and it may be, but sometimes to get to the magic, it takes a lot of work, a little bit of luck, and potentially going down the wrong road or two and realizing, I don't know what the heck I was doing. The second reason we do it is we want to promote movement. When you consider most people in America and most people in other countries don't move enough, if you can listen to people who move and are passionate about it, and it makes you think or change the way you do it, then it's a success. Like I've said before, sometimes the best way to find guests is you stalk them on social media. Sometimes you find them other ways. And in this case, I was fortunate enough, today's guest submitted an article to the National Strength and Conditioning Journal, and I was fortunate enough to interview her for a podcast. I was interested in the topic. We had a good conversation, and I'll have to confess, one of the reasons is she's also Australian, and it's very difficult to have a bad podcast interview with an Australian because most Americans love the accent. So we're with Dr. Kate Baldwin. She is a physio, which will explain how that differs or how it's similar to a physical therapist, and also a strength coach and endurance coach. Kate, thanks for taking time to talk to Moving to Live.
Hi, Ben, or g'day, Ben. Is that better to suit the Australian accent? I hear that a lot, that people think the Australian accent sounds nice. I don't know. I think it sounds at times maybe a little rough, but we'll go with it.
My favorite question I always ask every Moving to Live guest, the first question I always ask is, what's your, in a positive way, 30-second elevator spiel? You get stuck in an elevator, you get stuck on a plane, and somebody says, well, who are you or what do you do? What do you say?
So I'm Kate, I'm Aussie. I did my double degree in physiotherapy and sports science and completed my PhD in strength training and endurance athletes. I work predominantly in the exercise industry, and I treat exercise as medicine. So I'm all about movement as medicine, helping people move, helping people stay strong, stay injury-free, and get the most out of their sport and their life and what they want to achieve.
So just in that intro, you've brought up a couple of questions that I'm interested in learning more about, or maybe having my beliefs reinforced. I know here in the United States, a physical therapist is very similar to a physiotherapist in Australia or in Canada. I also know here in the United States, we've gravitated or moved towards the doctoral or the DPT. Kind of describe, if you don't mind, in Australia, how does the physiotherapy education, or somebody graduates from school and says, I want to be a physiotherapy therapist, what do they have to do for schooling?
So to get into physio, I think it's really competitive still in Australia. So when you graduate high school, I think you still need quite a high It's called an ATAR, so a score when you graduate, and you can go into it as an undergraduate, which I believe is a little bit different from how it's done in America and Canada, but I may be wrong on that. So you can go into it straight from high school, and it's a 4-year undergraduate degree. So there's lots of practical placements. So you have to cover musculoskeletal, cardio, neuro, etc. So all of your main fields. I originally just enrolled in physio, and then I found out that the uni that I went to did a double degree with sports science, and my love of sports science was there, and I was a little bit torn between the two of what to do. And then when I found out there was a double degree, I thought that's perfect. So that's 5 years to do the double degree. So you can go straight from high school. Alternatively, there's a master's program that you can do here in Australia as well. And from my understanding, that's a 3-year degree, so you can do that at postgrad as well. So they're your two sort of main options that you can pick.
And would I be correct in saying that your physiotherapy practice that you do is a little bit different from what would be, using air quotes, the typical physio practice in Australia?
Yes, I think that some are moving more towards as well what we do, and some like us do exist, but not many. Ours is, so we had an empty warehouse, so quite a big warehouse, and we decked it out. So we have 2 consulting rooms, and the rest of it is a gym. So we've got 3 big rigs, leg press, glute ham raise, seated calf raise, pulley machine, kettlebells, dumbbells, everything in there. So often we have people walk in, and they sort of walk in and look straight at the gym and go, "Oh, I don't think I'm in the right place." I'm like, "Oh, no, you are. Come in. This is what you will be doing today." So it's definitely different in that way. Some of my first jobs were really just a treatment room, which, in hindsight, you can't fix everyone just in a treatment. Well, many people just in a treatment room. There are still a lot of those clinics that exist, but I think that physio always needs to have that form of exercise rehab involved in it as well. And a lot of people don't feel super confident in the gym as well. They might not have done a lot of exercise before. So having that private gym area on site is a really good way to encourage people to do exercise, feel safe in the gym, feel monitored in the gym as well. So it's definitely not, I guess, what you would traditionally think of a physio clinic to be.
And I want to touch on that a little bit more before I get an answer to my second question that your elevator spiel or introduction brought in. So you graduate, you've got a double major, and then you decide at some point, I want to get a doctorate too. And for people who are listening, who are familiar, when you get a PhD, the typical path, or for most of us, is we go into teaching education and we do research. It's a little bit different for you. And I'm also curious because I've heard before, I actually went to doctoral studies with a couple of Australians. And my understanding is the program for getting a doctoral degree in Australia is a little bit different than the United States. In the United States, we have to take a series of courses, and then we have to pass an oral comps, and then we get to do our dissertation or our major project. Hopefully I've done smaller projects prior to that. My understanding in Australia is it's more research-based as opposed to classroom-based. If with your experience, if you could talk about that a little bit, I think that would be interesting.
Yeah, my PhD was pretty much all research-based, really. So obviously you come up with a proposal, you present that gets reviewed by your external reviewers or some internal ones. But mine was, my PhD was all research-based. I did it by publication. So I find that really, really good experience and good feedback that you get straight away on your work as well. So mine was broken into four main studies, and doing that first one and sending that off and getting reviewer feedback, I think is really good. It gives you from the get-go just good feedback onto what the process is like and how research works and what's really required to get a publication in a Q1 journal, and how you go through rigorous methodology and how you think about things and the problem and you solve them. So it's definitely very, very research-based. That's how I did mine. In terms of masters, you can do that by coursework depending on what you do or research, but my PhD was all research based there, and by publication. So I think that's a really good way of doing it. Just exposes you, kind of just throws you in the deep end, exposes you to what the research world is like. And especially if you do it by publication, like I said, you get that good feedback from relevant people in your field, like the best in your field. The people you strive to be like are reviewing your work and giving you feedback on it. And that's so invaluable. I think that's just incredibly helpful. You just have to be really thick-skinned when you do your PhD and the research. You just have to learn, it is what it is. All these comments are just for feedback to make you better, and you just have to accept that that's what it is. You come out of a PhD with very, very thick skin and the ability to take on board feedback and not be demoralized when either your supervisors or external reviewers or anyone give you feedback. You just go, look, all of this is going to make me better. This is how you learn. So that was my experience with it. Overall was really positive, a lot of work, but really, really positive doing it that way.
And what was the impetus to pursue the doctoral degree after getting the double major as an undergraduate?
Yeah, so when I graduated, I worked in private practice. I got a job actually through one of my practical placements, and I had really high hopes for this job. You know, being a new grad, you're all excited to go out and work in the field. I'd studied for 5 years. I just couldn't wait to get out there. And I was really disappointed in my experience. I worked in a private practice where it was patient in, patient out. I worked 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. or 9 a.m. to 7 p.m. Every day, every third Saturday. It was a lot of work. And in that time, I would see patients in 20-minute blocks. And the way that I work now is it takes me 20 minutes to just build rapport with someone and to go over a history, and sometimes even longer than that if you know, depending on the patient and the complexity. And so often I would just take the history of the patient and that would be my session over. And I couldn't do anything in that time. There was a little bit of gym equipment where I was, but a little bit, I think there was a pulling machine and some dumbbells. So I would try and do what rehab I could with that. And I would get pulled up by my boss at the time and told, hey, people pay for your hands-on. People pay for hands-on treatment. Like I would virtually get told off for doing exercise with my patients. And in my mind, I always thought, well, people pay me to get better. That's why they're coming to see me. And I'm doing whatever means I can to get them better. Sure, there's a place for hands-on treatment every now and again. Absolutely. I'm not opposed to that, but it's the language that you use around it. It's explaining to people that that's not what's going to fix them. It can help symptoms. But, you know, it's the exercise. That's the long-term thing that's going to help a particular injury or a particular chronic disease. And to be told that was not what I was meant to do, yeah, I think it really played with my mind too, because I was a new grad and very easily influenced, I guess. I wanted to do well. I wanted to make my boss happy. I didn't want to, you know, lose my first job. So I found this battle within myself thinking, I don't think that what they're telling me is right, but I really want to keep my job. And they're so much more experienced than me. They know so much more than me. So I stuck this out for almost a year. And in the end, it really ruined me as a physio. I hated it. I quit, I resigned, and I didn't know what to do after that because I felt really deflated that, you know, I'd been to uni for 5 years and I found myself in a profession that just was not what I thought. So I went back to uni because I had, just for a social catch up, because I had a lot of lecturers, especially my sports science lecturers, that became friends and became good mentors to me. And I talked to two of them and they said to me, like, hey, come back. We'll help give you some tutoring work and enroll in your research. We know that was of interest to you. Come back and enroll in that and give that a crack. And I thought, yeah, I know I wasn't happy in my experience of what I had with private practice physio. So I enrolled in that and I never looked back. And I'm so grateful for that day that I went in and I talked to these mentors that I had. I'm so grateful that I put in the hard yards in my undergrad as well and made those good relationships, because they wouldn't have offered that to, well, I had the marks to enroll, but it was also, I think, that they knew that I was really trying and that I'd always put in effort. So I'm so grateful for the way that I was in my undergrad as well to help open up that opportunity too. And from there, I loved teaching. I loved working with students. I loved my research. And I was just 10 times happier. And I remember thinking, this is so much better. And then through my research, it kind of led me a little bit back into clinic, but I can touch on that later.
Was there any time when you went back to uni and you started working on the doctoral degree, was there any time where you're thinking, you know, I want to become a full-time professor and I want to teach and I want leave the clinical as something I did in the past. It'll kind of slowly sink down the level of my vita as I extend my vita.
Yes, so I definitely thought that all throughout my my research. I thought that I think that's what pathway I want to go down. And then towards the end, I did a big 26-week intervention in my PhD with endurance athletes. And throughout that, I actually ended up doing some physio and exercise work from the uni I was doing my PhD from. I hired one of their rooms. I paid like a weekly rent to them, and I treated triathletes I knew through the community, and just people from word of mouth would come in and see me. So I did treatment, exercise, rehab. I could do physio and sports science how I felt, or what's based on the research of how it should be done. And sure enough, my people were getting better, and everyone was happy, and I was happy. My patients were happy. Word of mouth grew. I got more and more patients, and I sort of did that as like my top up kind of income throughout my PhD, and that then made me think, I love teaching, but also my passion for clinical work is really reignited. And so then naturally over the duration of my PhD, I became sort of half of my time teaching, a third of my time teaching, third of my time researching, third of my time clinical. And then I started to really like that balance. Once I could find that clinical work that I really liked, I then realized, actually, I do like this. I was just sort of under a bad influence before and not doing it. I didn't feel like I was doing what was right by the patients then as well, and no one wants to do that. So once I sort of more found my way over time, I realized, research and teaching really kept me up to date with literature and what I was then doing in clinic. And I think that's also missed a lot. So I felt like I was bridging all these gaps, because then clinic would also help influence my research and my teaching as well, because it would say, look, yes, that sounds great in literature. How does that actually translate when you try and apply that? So I feel like the more balance I had amongst them, then I went, okay, maybe not 100% academic. Maybe I'll have that clinical experience as well, which is what I've ended up with now, is a nice balance of them. And I really like that, because I think students also like when I teach that they know that I work in clinic. A lot of my patients like to know that I'm involved in research and teaching, and I think they complement each other really well. So I'm happy that it sort of naturally found this balance.
I think one of the things that the longer you're in the field, if you meet people who are hardcore researchers, or you meet people who are hardcore practitioners, they often forget each needs the other. If we don't have the research to influence how we might do the practice, then the practice is going to become stagnant. On the other hand, if the practice doesn't say, hey, this particular protocol or this way, this is not practical and it doesn't work, then the research is pretty much useless. And I think sometimes there's a tendency to forget that, unless you have people who kind of, I'm not saying this in a negative way, but a positive way, they keep dabbling in both areas, or they kind of straddle the fence.
Yes, absolutely. Because there's some research showing that it takes about 7 years for research to come into practice. And that to me is just not good enough. But I do understand that, because like I said, when I was in a clinic working for someone else, and I was seeing, I don't even want to think about how many patients I was seeing a day, just too many. There's no way I would have time to then go and look up the latest research and be able to apply that. It's not the clinician's fault. It's, they're so overworked, they don't have time. So you can see how it takes that long. But for me, luckily, being at the forefront of that research and being around researchers and teaching the most up-to-date things, it really kept me fresh as a clinician, and vice versa. So it's definitely a really good balance between that. And I think it helps both of my sides of it. And I think it stops me sort of getting stagnant in one as well. I tend to get a little bit bored if I do the same thing a lot of times over. So I think it keeps me relevant in both fields. And I think that will stop me then going, I'm bored of that, I'm going to change career to this or this. I think it keeps it fresh.
I think you said something interesting there. It takes about 7 years for the research to come to practice. So just kind of conversational, we're not going to hold you to this, but I'm interested in your thoughts on, with that, we've known for much longer than 7 years the benefits of resistance training or strength training for keeping people mobile and keeping people active. Why do you think there's been the lag on the clinical side? And I know there's been a lag on the clinical side here in the United States, and from us chatting prior to starting recording, also in Australia. Why do you think there's that clinical lag of not getting more patients instead of the hands-on the ultrasound, the hot packs, which is better than it was 15 years ago, but it's still the idea of actually prescribing resistance training is kind of foreign to many clinicians.
Yeah, I think that there's quite a few things that influence this. So one, I think that some clinicians are not comfortable with prescribing exercise. So, it's that natural, you'll do what you're good at. And maybe I'm that way biased as well. I think I'm really good at prescribing exercise. So maybe I do that more than hands-on treatment because that's what I'm good at. Luckily, the research supports me though. And I know that it's what I should be doing. So I think that's a big one. I think that in a lot of undergrad degrees, there's just not enough emphasis on appropriate exercise prescription. So I think that's a big one. And then also, when you look at then continued education courses, when people do graduate, there's so many on manual therapy and so little on exercise prescription. I think that really needs to change. So we need to upskill a lot of people as well. Like I feel confident in my exercise prescription because I did a PhD in it. So you would hope I would feel confident in it, right? But that's because I spent almost every second of every day researching this. So again, it's nothing with the clinician. I certainly don't blame them. It's having the time and the access and the ability to learn that and being dedicated the time so they can upskill and they can learn, they can feel confident. I don't think that a lot of practitioners are given that ample time to do that. I also think that a lot of it stems potentially from sort of all the healthcare professionals not being on the same wavelength. I've worked with someone before who I've worked with her and got her into exercise, into strength training. It was the first time in her life. She was sort of mid-50s. It was the first time in her life strength training. It took a good almost a month for her to get really confident. And then she had said to me, Kate, I've never felt more confident in the gym. I feel so happy. I feel strong. And I was like, amazing. And then she went and saw her GP and her GP told her, why are you lifting weights? You shouldn't be lifting weights. And because this was a GP versus a sports scientist or a physio, people sort of think the GP is more qualified. Yeah, in the medical field, of course they are, but not in exercise prescription. Physios and sports scientists are a lot more qualified. And so she stopped coming because her GP told her not to. And I have had so many patients tell me, my doctor said, don't deadlift, it's bad for your back. My doctor said, don't squat, it will put too much compression load through my back. And it's just this uphill battle against misinformation. I think there's a lot of misinformation on social media, which drives me bonkers. I just think there is so much sort of fear around it. And I think people are worried that exercise might make someone a little bit sore or could potentially flare something up. And you know what? It may, but someone having a short-term little flare up from something is a lot better long-term than never exercising or never doing strength training. Like the benefits are far going to outweigh it. It's like anything, running's great for you. Walking's good for you every now and again. You might slip on a banana peel, I'm not sure, but something and have a little flare up from that. But overall, doing that long term is really good for you. So I think there are many factors and they really need to keep being worked on. But I think it's a little bit of lack of knowledge, lack of continued education, lack of unison amongst all of the healthcare professionals and spreading all the same information, even though it is readily available, nicely summarized in research. I still don't think that it's unison amongst all the healthcare professionals to be on the same wavelength. I also think that for a lot of private practices, and this is coming from someone that owns a private practice, but it's a lot easier for them to make money from getting someone in twice a week to do massage, ultrasound, like you said, any of that, than exercise. Like it's harder to sell exercise to someone. It involves someone doing hard work, and it is hard work. So I think obviously as a private practice owner, some people, that they would prefer to take that money. Like I remember when we set up our clinic, who we bought our supplies from called me and said, Kate, you haven't got an ultrasound machine for treatment or a TENS machine. And I laughed. And she was like, well, do you want to order one? And I was like, no, I don't use that. Where's the research to support that? And she was genuinely concerned for me that I was opening a physio and exercise clinic without any form of that kind of modality. And I was like, no, I'm fine. I don't need that. And it was sort of mind blowing to her that you could run a clinic without it because that's how it's always been run. So yeah, it's a very complicated thing. I think that still needs a lot of work to move forwards.
And I know from the name of your business, Endurance Movement, the question I haven't asked that's obvious, are all of your patients, are they all endurance athletes, or is it across the spectrum? If somebody finds you you're willing to work with them if you believe exercise will work, which I think we both know is in almost all instances.
Absolutely. I've often thought about changing our name because I think I work with 50% endurance athletes, 50% general pop. And I love working with general population because you see really big improvements and you see a change in their actual life, in their quality of life. I have a really good relationship with some fantastic sports doctors here who send me not just endurance athletes, just anyone that does physical activity, like a lot of chronic low back pain, for example. And I love working with that and seeing really big improvements in chronic pain, in injuries, in performance. And again, I think that's the side of it that sort of keeps it really exciting as I work with a different variety of people. And a lot of the time, your principles of exercise, they don't change. They don't change based on, the level of your athlete. Yeah, the weight will, but it's still a direct, like a percentage for them. It's just, your elite athlete might lift a little bit more. Sometimes they lift less. So I think it's really actually a bit more 50-50. And some weeks I'll have weeks where I go, it seems to only be athletes that are booked in. It will be more of a performance-based week. And then some weeks I have more clinical population. So it really depends, but I love working with anyone.
I'm reminded with your conversation about your types of patients that you get. I was fortunate enough a few years ago to tear the labrum of my shoulder. And the orthopod who repaired it said, "You're going to physical therapy despite your knowledge because I don't trust you not to do something stupid," which in hindsight, this was about 20 years ago. In hindsight, I agree with him. And I remember sneaking a look at the physical therapist notes, and the notes for the first day said, should recover well if he doesn't do too much. So I'm curious how the balance is when you see non-athletes who maybe are not used to your type of physical therapy, who maybe they've done physical therapy before, and you come in and you say, okay, we're going to do this and that. How do you convince them to either A, try it, or B, this is a give and take, or this is a teamwork aspect. It's not you come in and lay down on the table for 45 minutes and then walk out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's I've definitely hit sort of sticking points with people. I remember one person at the end was like, I said, we're going to do this rehab and we'll do this and this. And she goes, okay, but at the end, massage. And I was like, well, I said, look, it might make you feel a little bit better, but long term, it's not going to make a difference. And she was saying, no, but traditional physiotherapy, I always have a massage at the end. I was like, do you know what? If that's what's going to get her exercising short term, I'll do it, because it meant that she would come in, she would do her exercises, and I would give her a few minutes of massage, and she was happy. And I was like, look, it's the trade-off for her to be on board, because I think if I had have said no, then she wouldn't have done any of the exercise. So sometimes you have to compromise. But I think that explaining things well, backing it up with good evidence-based literature, I don't go into, look, in this study with this methodology, but I'll summarize things such as, for example, the GLAD program, which is the osteoarthritis, so hip and knee replacements. We know that a 12-week exercise intervention can decrease the need to have surgery for hip and knee replacements. I will sort of explain, look, this research has found this. It's very good quality research. How about we give this a try? And I think you explain it really well, and you really listen to your patient as well, and you listen to their goals, and you think that exercise is going to help them achieve their goals, and you always relate it to them. I think as long as you're listening and you're explaining things well, I haven't come into too many issues with that. It's about exercising sensibly, finding out what that person likes as well, because sometimes people don't know that they like exercise or rehab, or they don't because they've not done it before. They've always had manual therapy, and then you show them some exercises and they go, well, it's not as hard as I thought, or hey, I actually enjoyed that more than I thought and it didn't hurt, so I'm quite happy with that. So I think that as long as you listen to someone, you explain something well, you obviously appropriately prescribe your exercise and make it specific to them, There's no reason that people aren't on board. Of course, every now and again, you're going to have people who just don't want to do it, and that's fine. No amount of convincing or educating is going to change their mind, and that's okay. Like, often I would just say to them, unfortunately, I'm not sure that I'm the best physio for you. My strengths are an exercise prescription. If you would prefer more hands-on treatment, by all means, absolutely, perhaps find another physio, another practitioner that would be better suited to the treatment that you're after. And it never ends badly. It's just going through that process and explaining, making sure that your goal or their goals align with what you can do.
And I know at the opposite end of the spectrum, when you work with long distance triathletes or runners or people like that, it often is the opposite of that. How do you get them to maybe reduce their activity and do their rehab, strength training, et cetera, so that a later date they can resume their activity without pain, or you see them running down the road and kind of grimace and go, oh, that doesn't look good. So how do you approach the opposite end of the spectrum with the highly motivated? If I tell them to do 3 sets, they're going to do 6 sets twice a day.
Yes, I often tell people my job is to tell you what not to do. I'm not concerned that you're not going to do your rehab. I know you're going to do your rehab. You're going to do too much. So again, that comes to a lot of education that says if you just stick this out in the short term, when we follow these guidelines, it will get you back quicker. Often, if an endurance athlete is injured, then their strength training sort of replaces whatever aspect of their training is that they can't do. So that's why they'll tend to do a little bit too much, because they feel like they need to bridge that gap. So I often sort of relate it to, look, if you ended up with the flu or you ended up really unwell, you would have to take a couple of weeks off training anyway to rest and recover. Just take this as this. And I explain it happens to athletes. This happens all the time. It's not going to set you back. This is our goals. This is what we're working on. And this is why. And we'll really go through it. And again, as long as they understand what they're doing and why they are doing it, often I find they're pretty adherent. And if they don't, they often come back and say, okay, they did too much, and I understand now why you told me not to. So sometimes they sort of learn that little bit harsh way. I find with endurance athletes, it's not so much doing even any more sets. It's they don't have enough rest, because they're so used to obviously swimming, biking, running, where there's virtually no rest. So getting them to lift heavier weights and having a 3-minute rest to them is like mind-blowing. So that's often where I have trouble. So I'll say to them, I'm putting the timer on and you're not going until the timer again. So it's just finding those strategies and what works for them. And keeping your reins on. And again, educating, explaining, reasoning, listening to them, listening to why are they doing more, and finding a middle ground for them, so then they're happy as well. So then they'll trust you and listen.
And I know you're kind of different from the typical physio because you also have the strength training background. And I think that can possibly be beneficial for the athletes that you work with, because they're more likely to listen to you and understand that your background is not just the rehab person or the strength person. How has your input been, or how has your relationship or interaction been with the, for lack of a better term, old school endurance coaches who believe endurance athletes shouldn't lift, for just to throw out an old wives' tale? Well, I'm a runner. I don't need to lift for my legs because I already worked my legs enough. Yeah,
there is in particular, I think one quite prominent coach who's very anti-strength training. And
only one?
Yeah, I know. One that about 1 million, but no, but a real prominent who's a real advocate against it. Mm-hmm. And it really frustrates me. And I think my kind of way forward on things is educating and explaining things. Like, I think that if you explain, look, this is how strength training works. It can improve your musculotendinous stiffness, and that you think of that as like an elastic band. The stiffer and stronger that is, the less energy your muscles will use. This will help you perform better, and there is good research to back it up. Like, you don't have to. In endurance athletes, strength training is a means to an end. It's not their main thing, right? You're focusing on improving rate of force development, improving musculotendinous stiffness, all of these things that are going to help them perform better. So I think once you explain that, and you explain that the strength training shouldn't negatively impact their overall endurance performance if you schedule it right, if you train them right, if you get the timing of it right, if you make it specific to that athlete. There's no reason it will negatively impact them. It's only going to positively impact them. And I think that a lot of coaches are really open to that. Again, it comes down to them not knowing how to do that. But I think that that's great, because I also work with a lot of coaches who recognize that. And it's not up to the swim, bike, run coach to do that. Their job is swim, bike, run. Strength training and endurance athletes, whilst it can be simple, it's also quite complex because there's a lot of things to consider. So I think explaining that, letting them outsource it to someone who is a professional in that is really good. So again, just educating that. And again, some people, that resistance is huge. And I think that in some people, it's just, I don't know if it'll ever go through to them. You can educate till the cows come home. You can try your best. You can show them the literature. You can explain how it works and the mechanisms. But if they're not going to come on board with it, you can talk to the athletes as well. I think at the end of the day, the athletes need to take control, make a decision for themselves, which a lot of them do, which is fantastic. But everyone has their different coaching philosophies, rightly or wrongly, that's what it is. And I think that sometimes you just have to say, I'm not going to waste my time and energy. I've done what I can. I've put it out there. There's nothing more you can do, So I think just, again, it comes down to that educating and making it specific to the coach or to those athletes. And if that doesn't work, I hope that their athletes change to someone who does work.
Very, very well put. We're talking with Kate Baldwin. She is a physiotherapist, and endurance coach, kind of expanding on the resistance training and endurance activities. You've got really three groups of endurance athletes in the world. You've got those elite athletes who are making their living at it, people like your husband. You've got the high-level age group athletes who either maybe will move on, or maybe they were collegiate swimmers or collegiate runners and they still have those competitive juices. And in some cases, they may do even better than some of the elite athletes. And then you have the typical, for lack of a better term, the age groupers, the people who enjoy the participation, or they're participating because they enjoy doing the activities or the travel to the races. And one of the things we have here in the U.S., where just starting spring and people are in their beginning of their marathon phases. And one of the things we've seen, and I don't know this has happened in Australia, but one of the things over the past 10, 15 years or so is various team and training where people run to raise money for charities. And what it has a tendency to do is it has a tendency to attract people who maybe otherwise would not take on an Ironman distance triathlon or take on a marathon or even take on a half marathon, but because they're emotionally vested in it, because maybe they're raising money for a certain disease, they lost a friend or a loved one. As a professional, if you see one of these people early on in the phase and they've become injured because they've immediately overloaded because they're basically following a cookie cutter program, what are some recommendations or advice if somebody's listening to this and they're going, I'm hurting every time I run and I know this shouldn't happen? What can they do? Because I think a lot of this is similar to the physical therapist or the physiotherapist who doesn't do the resistance training as a prescription. They just don't know. They're just like, I can run a marathon. They said, here's a 12-week program and I can run a marathon from couch to finisher.
Yeah. And I think, Ben, what you said now, it's just they don't know because the information's not sort of readily available. There's so much conflicting information. But often when people sign up for events like this and they get injured, they just do too much too quickly and do it too fast. And that's the most common thing. So my advice to them would be slow down. Don't do your runs all too fast or your bikes all too fast or your swims all too fast. I do quite like the 80-20 kind of rule, even 90-10. So that means like 80 or 90% of your training, easy, really easy, conversation pace. If you're just starting out and this is your first event and your goal is to finish, just make sure that you finish. I think it was Emma Snowsill who said you're better off, like 90% overcooked than 1%, undercooked than 1% overcooked. And it's so true. Like you won't be able to finish the race if you're injured. So you're better off building up the fitness that you need to finish and to achieve your goal and to raise that money and do that for the fantastic reason that they've signed up for it for. So, and also they probably train like me for enjoyment, and training is so much more enjoyable if you can do it with someone and run and chat. or be able to talk to someone on your bike ride. So keep generally 80 to 90% of that training just nice and easy. Add your intervals in because you do need some of those physiological changes, absolutely. But again, something, that's not too crazy, and only if they feel like they can put in that effort. And that applies for their swim, bike and run. And then that strength training will also be that thing to help build up their body's ability, their bones, their tendons, their muscles to actually tolerate the load, especially as that load does increase. So it's go easier, do a little bit less, and progress it just a little bit less. Our bodies are very good at telling us if we're tired or fatigued, that is normal when you're doing some endurance training. But if you're finding yourself going, I'm so tired, I just don't want to go for this run, it's probably not the best idea, or dial back the intensity if you do decide to go for that run. So, take it, just dial it back and enjoy the ride. Get strong and be smart.
We were chatting a little bit before we started recording about social media, and I think the advice that you gave is probably contraindicated by, I'm not even going to say the percentage, but if you pull up various social media feeds, you can read about people crushing it and doing too much. And I think the advice that you're giving is, number one, for the enjoyment, number two, for the health. I'm reminded, I was talking to my girlfriend a few days ago. When I was in my doctoral studies, I decided that, I wanted to do an Ironman distance triathlon. And in my everlasting wisdom, I thought, well, if I have to run a marathon at the end of this, it would make sense to do an ultra run the year before. So I trained for a 46-mile trail run, figuring if I could run 46 miles, a marathon wouldn't be that bad. And I remember as I trained, and I don't know if this was just the innate survival instinct, but I had 3 goals. I wanted to finish in daylight. It was being held in November, and I really didn't want to run on trails in the dark. And I didn't want to have a life-altering experience, where I crawled in with my muscles twitching and spittle running down my face. And what I realized when I did that and then trained with a friend of mine for the Ironman the next year is the enjoyment isn't so much the race. It's the being out there, as you said, with friends and talking in the conversation. And my friend, when he finished the Ironman, he's standing there after the race. He goes, well, that was fun. It wasn't life-altering. I like the training more. And I think people miss that movement and the enjoyment of, rather than meeting for a beer, not that that's ever a bad thing, but rather saying, we're going to meet at 6 a.m. and do a 5K jog. I think that's the thing that we're missing out if we want people to move and we want people to enhance their quality of life.
And I also think that people forget that is associated with performance. If you are out there consistently enjoying training and you're training at the right intensities and you are loving it, you will train more consistently. You will be injury-free. You will be in a better mindset. We know that stress strongly influences injuries and chronic diseases and all sorts of things. It slows down recovery. So if your event becomes a stressful thing for you and training becomes stressful, you're going to put yourself at higher risk of injury. And you're smack bang all right, Ben. Like there is so much misinformation on social media, or people only post their really high intensity sessions, or people only follow professionals. It's very different training at that level because, yes, I'm sure lots of them still do it for enjoyment. They probably wouldn't do it if they didn't. But also prize money is on the line. That's their livelihood. That's their career. They have to dig deep. They have to hurt themselves. They not physically injure. I mean, like training is hard, hurting. That is their job. That's how they make money. That's how they bring money home to the family. When you are doing this more for enjoyment, now some people obviously enjoy that. Absolutely. Like I said, for, 20% of your training, go for it. Those sessions do feel really good too, but you don't have to have every session hurting or every session being like this. You will put yourself at risk of injury. You will stress yourself out. It won't become enjoyable and you just won't perform. And same as a coaching relationship to an athlete as well, or any advice that you'll put in, it should come from a trusting source. Your coach shouldn't be standing on the sidelines just dictating this. And why didn't you make that set? Why didn't you make that leave time? Why didn't you do this? Why didn't you do that? That's not how you get extra percent now. And I think this is a really old school kind of philosophy on coaching. And look, maybe some athletes respond to that, yes, but also some athletes respond to a coach that they just trust and that they still get that same extra percent because the coach is on the sidelines motivating them, saying, you missed that one. I know you can do this on the next one. Trust me, you can do it. and they'll hit the same thing, the same as a way as a coach that might be a lot more savage. Like, I think that the shift does need to happen, especially in recreational athletes. Like my first Ironman, I just had so much fun. I remember starting on the sideline and I wanted to qualify for Kona. That was my goal. Like, I wanted to have fun, but I wanted to do well. And I knew I'd done the right training to do well. And I just remember starting on the sidelines and thinking, I am so excited. I'm going to enjoy every moment of this. I'm never going to get my first Ironman back. Let's just go out and have fun. And I did, and I loved it. And I qualified for Kona. I did a great time. I had the best time ever. And I really think that I did so well because I had that mentality of, I mean, there were times where I didn't enjoy it. Don't get me wrong. You're saddle discomfort after 100 something Ks on the bike. No one has fun with that. Like, I wasn't riding around Happy McGee 24/7, but overall it was a really positive experience. And when it hurt, you go, it doesn't matter. It's my first one. I'm here. It's okay. Let's embrace it. And I think you can do that and do well. Regardless of your level. And I think that sometimes when you're caught up in social media and only seeing really tough sessions because they look good, right? And they get a lot of social media likes, and a lot of elite athletes depend on social media for sponsorship. So that's what you're exposed to as an athlete. They're not going to post, today I did a 2-hour ride at 60% of my power at VO2 max, and that was fun, because that's not interesting, right? It's not as exciting. So you don't tend to see that side of it. And I think that it's not exciting. It's not fun. So this kind of stuff gets missed. And that's where I think it trips a lot of people up.
We've been talking with Kate Baldwin. I suspect I'm going to ask her to be on at a later date to talk more about strength and conditioning also, but I think it's a good time to end because I think the comments that she's made, number one, it should be fun. And number two, I'm probably paraphrasing here, but when in doubt, go easier, is going to go much better for the long term. Kate, I want to thank you for taking time to talk to Moving2Live. I suspected when I interviewed you for the Strength and Conditioning Journal, we'd have a good conversation. And I think this is, especially here in the US with marathon season starting up and early season triathletes, people can listen and realize it's supposed to be fun, and it should be a eustress or a good stress, not a distress. If it's a distress, maybe ask yourself, is it me? Is it my coach? Is it maybe there's too many other things going on in my life that maybe this isn't the best time to do it? Because I think, as we've all learned with COVID, there's always going to be another Ironman. There's always going to be another marathon. And the goal is to do basically as many as possible or as long as possible. I've had the good fortune to interview a gentleman named Don Moxley, and his goal is 20 years from now to do a 100-mile bike ride near a town where he grew up, just like he currently does. So, Kate, thank you for taking time to talk to Moving2Live.
Thank you so much for having me. Always enjoy chatting to you, Ben. It's great.
Thanks for listening to the latest episode of Moving2Live. Make sure you check out the show notes for contact information for our latest guest, as well as links about all the things we talked about. Intro and exit music is Traveling Light by Jason Shaw. You can subscribe to Moving2Live wherever you find podcasts or on our website, www.moving2live.com. Please tell your friends about Moving2Live and check out our sister podcast, FitLab PGH. FitLab PGH emphasizes movement in the Pittsburgh area and beyond with video podcasts, movement ideas, and interviews with people in the Pittsburgh area who understand movement is part of what makes life complete. Until next time, keep on moving.